The F-16 Fighting Falcon roared to life beneath Captain Janice Carter's trembling hands. But the tremor wasn't from fear, it was from pure, uncontainable excitement. At 26, she'd dreamed of this moment since she was 8 years old, watching the Thunderbirds perform at the air show in Phoenix. Now strapped into the cockpit of one of the most advanced fighter jets in the world, she should have felt invincible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Instead, she felt the crushing weight of every doubtful stare. From the flight line, "Carter, you're cleared for takeoff on runway 27, crackled the voice of air traffic control through her headset. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Brennan, her squadron commander, watched from the tower with arms crossed and an expression that could freeze jet fuel. Janice pushed the throttle forward, feeling the massive engines respond with a surge of power that pressed her back into her ejection seat. The runway stretched ahead like a concrete promise, but as she accelerated toward takeoff speed, she couldn't shake the memory of yesterday's briefing. "Emotional instability has no place in a cockpit," Brennan had declared, his steel-gray eyes fixed directly on her. "When you're flying at Mach 2 with millions of dollars of taxpayer equipment, feelings can get you and your wingmen killed." The comment had followed what he called her inappropriate emotional response during a training simulation the week before. Janice had been flying an escort for a simulated humanitarian aid mission when the scenario suddenly changed enemy. Fighters appeared on radar, threatening a convoy of medical supplies headed to earthquake victims. In the heat of the moment, her voice had cracked over the radio as she called out defensive positions. "I can't have pilots who break down under pressure," Brennan had continued, ignoring the fact that Janice had successfully completed the mission with 0 casualties. Combat aviation requires ice-cold precision, not tears. The memory stung as Janice pulled back on the stick, lifting off from Edwards Air Force Base into the crystalline California sky. Below her, the Mojave Desert stretched endlessly, its harsh beauty a stark contrast to the storm brewing in her mind. She'd been hearing variations of the same criticism her entire military career. At the Air Force Academy, when she'd gotten choked up during a memorial service for fallen pilots, her tactical officer had noted excessive emotional displays in her file. During flight school at Columbus Air Force Base, when she'd shown genuine concern for a fellow cadet who'd washed out, her instructor had warned her about getting too attached to people who couldn't handle the pressure. "Carter, this is Viper 1, came Brennan's voice through her radio. He was flying chase in another F-16, monitoring her performance like a hawk. "Execute combat air patrol pattern Alpha 7. Show me you can keep your emotions in check when things get complicated." Janice banked hard to the left, pulling nearly 6 Gs as she entered the designated training airspace. The pressure suit squeezed her legs and torso, fighting to keep blood flowing to her brain as the massive forces tried to drain it away. This was where pilots discovered what they were really made of, not just their technical skills, but their ability to think clearly when their body was under assault. "Roger, Viper 1. Beginning Cap Alpha 7, Janice responded, her voice steady despite the crushing weight pressing down on her chest. The training scenario was designed to be overwhelming. Multiple bogies appeared on her radar screen, coming from different directions and altitudes. Her job was to prioritize threats, coordinate with ground control, and maintain defensive positioning, all while pulling enough G-forces to make most people lose consciousness. "Bandit, 2 o'clock high, 15 miles in closing," called the voice of the training controller. "Second group of contacts bearing 090, Angels 20, hostile intent." Janice's fingers flew over the controls, switching between radar modes and weapon systems while simultaneously adjusting her position to counter the threats. Her heart rate spiked as the complexity increased, but her hands remained steady on the stick. "This is Falcon 2, she transmitted, using her call sign. I have visual contact on the lead bandit, requesting permission to engage. Negative, Falcon. 2, came Brennan's sharp response. Maintain defensive posture only. Do not repeat. Do not let your emotions drive you into an offensive position. The comment hit like a slap. Janice had made a tactically sound decision based on the positioning of enemy aircraft, but Brennan had immediately assumed it was driven by emotion rather than strategy. She bit back her response, focusing instead on the radar screen where more threats were appearing. Additional contacts, multiple bandits inbound from the north, the controller announced. Falcon 2, you are now outnumbered 4-1. Recommend immediate defensive action. This was it, the moment Brennan was waiting for. Would she panic? Would her voice crack under pressure? Would she make the kind of emotional decision that, in his mind, proved women couldn't handle combat aviation? Janice took a deep breath and began the most complex defensive maneuver in her repertoire. She dove toward the deck, using the Earth's curvature to break radar lock from the pursuing aircraft, then pulled into a climbing spiral that would position her above the threat axis. The G-forces were punishing. She could feel her vision starting to tunnel as blood drained from her head, but she held the maneuver until she gained the tactical advantage. Falcon 2 has re-established defensive superiority, she reported, her voice calm and professional. All bandits are now in defensive positions relative to my aircraft. There was a pause on the radio. Then Brennan's voice tinged with what might have been a surprise. Copy that, Falcon 2, well executed. But Janice knew one successful training flight wouldn't change his mind. As she flew back toward Edwards, the California mountains rising like ancient sentinels in the distance, she reflected on the impossible position she found herself in, her emotional nature, the very quality that made her care deeply about her mission, her fellow pilots, and the people they were sworn to protect, was being characterized as a weakness. But Janice had learned something during her years of flying that Brennan and his old school mentality couldn't understand. Emotions weren't the enemy of good piloting. They were often what made the difference between a technically proficient aviator and a truly exceptional one. When she'd saved that cadet's life during a training emergency 2 years ago, it wasn't cold calculation that made her react faster than anyone else. It was the fact that she genuinely cared about his survival. When she'd flown her first real combat mission over Syria, providing air support for troops under fire, it wasn't detachment that made her flying so precise. It was the emotional connection she felt to the soldiers counting on her. But try explaining that to a squadron commander who believed the only good pilot was an emotionless robot. Landing back at Edwards, Janice taxied to the flight line where Brennan was already waiting, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. As she shut down the engines and began her post-flight procedures, she could see him conferring with Master Sergeant Reynolds, the senior enlisted advisor who'd been skeptical of her from day one. "Good flight, Captain," said her crew chief staff. Sergeant Danny Martinez, as she climbed down from the cockpit. Martinez was one of the few people on base who treated her like any other pilot, judging her purely on her performance rather than her gender or perceived emotional state. "Thanks, Danny. How'd she handle it?" Janice asked, patting the side of her aircraft affectionately. "Like a dream." "You're one of the smoothest pilots I've worked with," Martinez replied. "Don't let the colonel's attitude get to you. Some of these old-timers just need time to adjust." But time was exactly what Janice didn't have. Word had come down through unofficial channels that squadron assignments for the upcoming deployment to the Middle East were being finalized. Combat missions over active hostile territory, the kind of assignment every fighter pilot lived for. And the kind of assignment that Brennan seemed determined to deny her. That evening, in her small apartment off base, Janice sat at her kitchen table reviewing technical manuals and mission profiles. Her phone buzzed with a text from her younger sister Rebecca, who was finishing her residency at a hospital in Denver. "How's the flying going? Still dealing with that jerk commander?" Janice smiled despite her frustration. Rebecca was one of the few people who truly understood the challenges she faced. As one of only 3 women in her surgical residency program, Rebecca dealt with her own version of gender-based skepticism. "Same old story," Janice typed back. "Apparently caring about the mission makes me too emotional for combat." "There. Loss," came Rebecca's immediate reply. "Remember what Dad always said, the best doctors aren't the ones who don't feel anything. They're the ones who feel everything but can still function when it matters." Their father had been a Navy corpsman in Vietnam, serving with the Marines in some of the war's bloodiest battles. He died when Janice was 15, but his lessons about courage, compassion, and duty had shaped everything she'd done since. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm fighting a battle I can't win," Janice admitted in her next text. "You've never backed down from anything in your life," Rebecca responded. "Don't start now. Someone needs to prove that having a heart doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. And humans are exactly what the military needs more of." As Janice closed her phone and returned to her study materials, she reflected on her sister's words. Tomorrow would bring another day of proving herself, another opportunity to show that emotional intelligence and tactical excellence weren't mutually exclusive. What she didn't know was that in less than a week, she'd face a situation that would test everything she believed about the relationship between emotion and excellence, and that the lives of her entire squadron would depend on her ability to prove that caring deeply wasn't a weakness, but the greatest strength a pilot could possess. The notification came at 06:00 hours on a Tuesday morning that would change everything. Janice was already in the squadron briefing room, reviewing weather reports and UNOTAMIs for the day's training schedule, when Lieutenant Colonel Brennan strode in with a folder marked "Confidential" in red letters. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brennan announced to the assembled pilots, though his eyes lingered on Janice longer than necessary, "we have a special evaluation coming up. The Pentagon has decided to implement a new combat readiness assessment for all fighter squadrons deploying to active theaters. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Major Kelly Thompson, the squadron's operations officer, looked up from her flight planning charts. "What kind of assessment, sir?" "It's called the Integrated Combat Stress Evaluation," Brennan replied, opening the folder. "Designed to test pilot performance under maximum psychological pressure. The scenario involves a 72-hour continuous operation with sleep deprivation, multiple high-stress combat simulations, and what they're calling emotional resilience markers." Janice felt her stomach tighten. She knew exactly why this evaluation had been scheduled and exactly who it was designed to eliminate from deployment consideration. "The evaluation will take place at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada," Brennan continued. "Red flag airspace, full electronic warfare environment, live ordnance, and the most realistic combat scenarios the Air Force can create. Only 6 pilots from our squadron will participate, and only 4 will be selected for the Middle East deployment." Captain Mike Sullivan, one of the squadron's most experienced pilots, raised his hand. "Sir, what are the selection criteria for the evaluation participants?" Brennan's lips curved into what might have been a smile on a less calculating face. "Flight hours, technical proficiency scores, and psychological stability ratings. The 6 highest-scoring pilots will compete." Janice knew her flight hours and technical scores were among the best in the squadron. But psychological stability ratings, those subjective evaluations that had followed her throughout her career, that was where Brennan could exercise his bias. "The selected pilots are as follows," Brennan read from his list. "Major Thompson, Captain Sullivan, Captain Rodriguez, Captain Mitchell, Captain Barnes." He paused dramatically, "and Captain Carter." The briefing room fell silent. Janice felt every eye in the room turn toward her, some sympathetic, others skeptical. She'd made the list, but she understood the game being played. This wasn't an opportunity, it was a trap. After the briefing, Major Thompson caught up with Janice in the hallway. At 34, Thompson was one of only 3 female fighter pilots in the entire wing, and she'd fought her own battles to reach her current position. "You know what this is, don't you?" Thompson said quietly, checking to make sure they weren't overheard. "A setup," Janice replied without hesitation. "Brennan's been looking for a way to sideline you since you joined the squadron. This evaluation is his chance to do it officially, with Pentagon backing." Thompson's expression was grim. "The combat stress scenarios are designed to break people emotionally. They'll push you until you crack, then point to your reaction as proof you're unfit for combat. So what do I do?" "You prove them wrong," Thompson said simply. "But Janice, you need to understand, this isn't just about your career anymore. If you fail this evaluation, if you give them ammunition to say women are too emotional for combat roles, it affects every female pilot coming up behind you." The weight of that responsibility settled on Janice's shoulders like a lead blanket. She wasn't just fighting for her own future. She was fighting for the future of every woman who dreamed of flying combat missions. 3 days later, Janice found herself at Nellis Air Force Base, home of the famous Red Flag exercises and the most sophisticated air combat training in the world. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by the imposing bulk of the base's facilities and the sleek shapes of fighter aircraft from around the globe. The evaluation participants were housed in a special facility that felt more like a laboratory than military quarters. Each pilot had a private room equipped with monitoring equipment that would track everything from heart rate to sleep patterns throughout the 72-hour assessment. Dr. Sarah Chun, the Air Force psychologist overseeing the evaluation, briefed the 6 participants in a sterile conference room that smelled of fresh paint and disinfectant. "This assessment is designed to simulate the psychological pressures of extended combat operations," Dr. Chun explained. "You'll face sleep deprivation, information overload, moral dilemmas, and scenarios designed to trigger emotional responses. Your job is to maintain peak performance regardless of these stressors." Captain Rodriguez, a quiet pilot from Texas with over 500 combat hours, raised his hand. "Doctor, what constitutes failure in this evaluation?" "There are several failure modes," Dr. Chun replied, consulting her tablet. "Inability to complete assigned missions, compromised decision-making under stress, inappropriate emotional responses that could endanger crew or mission success, or what we call psychological breakdown, essentially any behavior that would be considered unfit for command in a combat environment." Janice noticed how Dr. Chun's eyes flicked toward her when mentioning inappropriate emotional responses. The fix was already in. The first phase began at midnight. All 6 pilots were awakened and immediately thrust into their first scenario, a nighttime combat air patrol over simulated enemy territory. But this wasn't ordinary flight simulation. They were in actual F-16s, flying real aircraft through a sophisticated electronic warfare environment that mimicked combat conditions with stunning realism. "Falcon Flight, this is Magic Controller," came the voice through Janice's headset. "We have multiple bandits inbound to your sector. Weapons free, engage at will." The radar screen lit up with contacts enemy fighters approaching from 3 different vectors. But something was wrong with the scenario. The enemy aircraft were flying patterns that would take them directly over a simulated refugee camp marked on Janice's moving map display. "Magic, this is Falcon 2, Janice transmitted. "Confirm engagement authority over civilian areas. I show a refugee camp directly beneath the enemy approach route. Falcon 2, you are cleared to engage. Minimize collateral damage, but do not let the bandits reach their target." It was a classic no-win scenario, designed to force pilots into impossible decisions. Engage the enemy and risk civilian casualties, or hesitate and allow the enemy to complete their mission. Janice found herself in the exact situation she'd been warned about, facing a moral dilemma that could trigger an inappropriate emotional response. But as she positioned her aircraft for an intercept, Janice realized something the test designers hadn't counted on. Her emotional investment in protecting civilians wasn't a weakness. It was making her think more creatively about the tactical problem. "Falcon Flight, this is Falcon 2, she transmitted to her wingman. "I have a solution that protects the civilians and eliminates the threats. Follow my lead." Instead of engaging the enemy fighters directly over the refugee camp, Janice led her flight in a sweeping maneuver that forced the bandits to alter course. By threatening their escape route, she compelled them to engage in air-to-air combat away from civilian areas. It was a tactically sound solution that demonstrated both combat effectiveness and humanitarian awareness. "Excellent work, Falcon Flight," came the controller's voice after the simulated engagement ended successfully. "All bandits destroyed, 0 civilian casualties." But when Janice landed back at Nellis, she found Dr. Chun waiting with a clipboard and a concerned expression. "Captain Carter, I need to ask you about your decision-making process during the engagement," Dr. Chun said as they walked toward the debriefing room. "Your transmission about civilian casualties suggests you experienced significant emotional stress regarding potential collateral damage." "I was concerned about civilian safety," Janice replied carefully. "That's part of effective mission planning. But your voice patterns indicated elevated stress levels specifically related to the civilian presence. That level of emotional investment could be problematic in actual combat situations where difficult decisions must be made quickly." Janice felt the trap closing around her. No matter how well she performed tactically, her emotional responses were being pathologized as evidence of unfitness for combat. The second phase of the evaluation began 12 hours later, after only 4 hours of sleep. This time, the scenario was even more diabolical. A simulated rescue mission where one of their own pilots had been shot down behind enemy lines. The downed pilot was actually Captain Barnes, who was playing his role via radio from a secure location. But the emotional manipulation was real: his distress calls, his pleas for rescue, his reports of enemy forces closing in on his position. "Falcon Flight, this is Ranger 7, came Barnes' voice, filled with convincing terror. "I'm taking small arms fire from multiple positions. My leg is broken, I can't move, please hurry." The rescue scenario required the pilots to navigate through a heavily defended area while coordinating with ground forces and managing limited fuel supplies. It was the kind of mission that demanded split-second decisions while balancing competing priorities. Janice found herself as flight leader for this mission, a responsibility that felt both like an opportunity and another trap. Every decision she made would be scrutinized for signs of emotional compromise. "Falcon 2, I need you to suppress those sights while Falcon 3 provides close air support for the rescue helicopter," she commanded, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. But as they approached the target area, the scenario became even more complex. The rescue helicopter reported taking fire and requested immediate support, while simultaneously Barnes' situation became more desperate. "Falcon Flight, I see enemy soldiers approaching my position," Barnes transmitted, his voice breaking with apparent fear. "There may be 50 meters away. I need help now." This was the moment Dr. Chun was waiting for. Would Janice make an emotional decision that prioritized saving Barnes over mission parameters? Instead, Janice did something unexpected. She made the tactically correct decision while maintaining emotional connection to the mission. "Falcon 3, continue close air support for the helicopter," she ordered. "Falcon 4, you're with me. We're going to create a diversion that draws enemy forces away from Ranger 7's position without compromising the rescue operation." Her solution was elegant and effective. By using precision strikes to create the appearance of a larger assault force in a different sector, she drew enemy attention away from both the rescue helicopter and Barnes' hiding place. The mission succeeded with all objectives met and all personnel safely recovered. But once again, Dr. Chun was waiting with her clipboard and pointed questions. "Captain Carter, your physiological monitors showed elevated stress responses throughout the rescue scenario, particularly when Ranger 7 reported enemy contact. How do you explain this pattern?" "I was monitoring multiple threats and coordinating a complex operation," Janice replied. "Some stress response is normal and appropriate, but your stress patterns were specifically correlated with threats to personnel rather than threats to the mission itself. That suggests emotional attachment that could compromise judgment." The pattern was becoming clear. No matter how successfully Janice completed the scenarios, her emotional responses were being characterized as evidence of instability. Her caring about the people she was sworn to protect was being twisted into a psychological defect. The final phase of the first day's testing pushed the pilots to their absolute limits. After 18 hours with minimal rest, they faced a scenario that combined air-to-air combat with ground support missions while managing multiple communications channels and tracking dozens of friendly and enemy forces. Janice's hands shook from fatigue as she gripped the flight controls, but her mind remained sharp. This was what she'd trained for, performing at peak efficiency when her body was screaming for rest and her nerves were frayed to the breaking point. The scenario culminated in a simulated emergency where another pilot, Captain Mitchell, reported engine failure over enemy territory. The rescue would require flying through heavily defended airspace with low fuel and diminished visibility due to weather. "All Falcon aircraft. This is Magic Controller," came the transmission. "The weather is deteriorating rapidly in the target area. Recommend abort rescue mission and return to base." It was another test. Would Janice prioritize safety protocols or risk everything to save a fellow pilot? "Magic, this is Falcon 2, Janice transmitted. "I have sufficient fuel and weather margins to attempt a rescue. Requesting permission to proceed." "Falcon 2, permission denied. Weather conditions are too dangerous for rescue operations." This was the moment that would define everything. Janice could follow orders and abandon Mitchell, demonstrating the kind of cold calculation that Brennan claimed was necessary for combat command. Or she could trust her judgment and emotional commitment to leaving no one behind. "Magic Falcon 2 is proceeding with a rescue mission," she declared, banking her aircraft toward the target area. The next 20 minutes were the most intense flying of Janice's career. She navigated through weather that pushed her aircraft to its limits, evaded simulated surface-to-air missiles, and located Mitchell's position despite minimal visibility. The rescue was successful, but it came at a cost. She disobeyed direct orders to achieve it. As she climbed out of her aircraft after landing, Janice saw Brennan waiting on the flight line. His expression was unreadable, but she knew her decision to disobey orders had given him the ammunition he needed. "Captain Carter," Brennan said formally, "report to Dr. Chun's office immediately for post-mission evaluation." Walking across the tarmac toward what felt like a tribunal, Janice reflected on the impossible position she'd been placed in. Every decision was a trap, every emotional response evidence of unfitness. But she'd learned something important during these first 18 hours of testing. Her emotions weren't making her a worse pilot, they were making her a better one. While her competitors were focused purely on following orders and avoiding mistakes, Janice was thinking creatively about how to achieve mission success while protecting the people who mattered most. The question now was whether the evaluation board would recognize that distinction, or whether they'd use her emotional intelligence as justification for ending her combat career before it truly began. Dr. Chun's office felt more like an interrogation room than a medical facility. The walls were bare except for her diplomas and a single American flag, while harsh fluorescent lighting cast everything in an unflattering glare. Janice sat across from the psychologist, acutely aware that every word she spoke was being recorded and analyzed. "Captain Carter, let's discuss your decision to disobey direct orders during the rescue scenario." Dr. Chun began, her pen poised over a thick evaluation form. "You were explicitly instructed to abort the mission due to weather conditions." "The weather was manageable within aircraft parameters," Janice replied carefully. "My fuel state and navigation equipment were sufficient for the mission. But you chose your personal judgment over explicit orders from air traffic control. In a combat environment, that kind of insubordination could have catastrophic consequences." Janice leaned forward slightly. "Doctor, with respect, leaving a pilot behind when rescue was possible would have had catastrophic consequences for squadron morale and future rescue operations. No one flies alone, and everyone comes home. That's not just a motto, it's a sacred trust." Dr. Chun made several notes, her expression neutral. "Your physiological monitoring during the rescue showed extreme stress responses, particularly elevated heart rate and cortisol levels. These readings suggest you were operating in an emotionally compromised state." "I was operating in a high-stress tactical environment," Janice countered. "Stress responses are normal and adaptive in that situation. The question isn't whether I felt stress, it's whether I performed effectively despite it." "And how would you characterize your performance?" "Mission successful. All personnel recovered safely. Aircraft undamaged. Tactical objectives achieved within acceptable risk parameters." Dr. Chun's pen stopped moving. For the first time since the evaluation began, she looked genuinely surprised. "You don't see any issues with your decision-making process?" "I see a pilot who prioritized mission success and personnel safety while operating within aircraft capabilities. If that's considered problematic, then perhaps the evaluation criteria need to be reconsidered." The room fell silent except for the hum of air conditioning. Dr. Chun studied Janice with new interest, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "Captain, I have to ask, are you aware that your emotional responses are significantly higher than your male counterparts? Are you aware that my mission success rate is also significantly higher than my male counterparts?" Janice shot back, then immediately regretted the confrontational tone, but instead of marking this as another black mark against her, Dr. Chun actually smiled. "Tell me more about that correlation," she said, setting down her pen. Janice hesitated, unsure if this was another trap. But something in Dr. Chun's expression had shifted from clinical assessment to genuine curiosity. "When I care about the outcome, really care, I perform better," Janice explained slowly. "I think more creatively about solutions. I consider factors that pure tactical calculation might miss. I don't just see aircraft and targets on a radar screen. I see real people whose lives depend on my decisions." "And you believe this emotional investment makes you a better pilot?" "I know it does. The question is whether the Air Force is willing to recognize that." Dr. Chun picked up her pen again, but this time her notes seemed different, more thoughtful, less clinical. "Captain Carter, you have one more day of evaluation remaining. I suggest you get some rest." As Janice left the office, she felt cautiously optimistic for the first time since arriving at Nellis. Maybe, just maybe, someone was finally listening. Second day of evaluation began with the most realistic combat scenario yet, a simulated strike mission against a heavily defended target complex. But this time, Janice wasn't flying solo. She was designated as flight leader for a 4-ship formation, responsible for coordinating a complex attack while managing air-to-air threats and surface-to-air missile systems. Her wingmen for this mission were Captain Rodriguez, Captain Sullivan, and Lieutenant Mark Davis. a young pilot fresh out of training who was clearly nervous about flying with the squadron's most controversial member. "Falcon Flight, this is Magic Controller," came the familiar voice as they approached the target area. "Your objective is the simulated command and control facility at grid reference 34 Sierra 891. Intelligence indicates heavy SAM coverage and possible fighter escorts." Janice studied her tactical display, noting the overlapping coverage zones of multiple surface-to-air missile sites. A direct approach would be suicide, but the mission timeline left little room for elaborate maneuvering. "Falcon Flight, this is Falcon Leader," she transmitted. "We're going to use a pincer movement. Falcon 3 and 4 will approach from the south to draw SAM attention. Falcon 2 and I will use that distraction to approach from the northwest and prosecute the primary target." "Falcon Leader, this is Falcon 4, came Davis's voice, tight with anxiety. "That puts 3 and me in the teeth of the air defenses. Are you sure about this plan?" Janice heard the doubt in his voice, not just about the tactics, but about following a female flight leader into combat. She'd faced this skepticism before, but never when lives were potentially at stake. "Falcon 4, I'm tracking your concern," she replied. "The southern approach has multiple escape routes and terrain masking. You'll have several options if the SAMs go active. Trust me, I've got your back." What followed was 15 minutes of the most precise flying Janice had ever executed. She threaded her aircraft through electronic jamming, missile launches, and simulated anti-aircraft fire while coordinating her flight's movements and maintaining constant awareness of each pilot's status. "Falcon 3 is taking SAM fire," Rodriguez called out as his threat warning system screamed. "Break left, Falcon 3. Falcon 4, suppress that SAM site with cluster bombs. Falcon 2, you're with me on the primary target." The attack unfolded like a perfectly choreographed dance. Rodriguez and Davis successfully suppressed the southern air defenses while Janice and Sullivan delivered their ordnance precisely on target. The entire flight egressed safely with mission objectives achieved and 0 losses. But as they flew back toward Nellis, Janice received an unexpected radio call on a discrete frequency. "Falcon Leader, this is Cowboy 2-1, came an unfamiliar voice. "I've been monitoring your frequency. Requesting permission to join your formation." Janice checked her radar and saw a single aircraft approaching from the east, an F-15E strike Eagle that hadn't been part of the original mission planning. "Cowboy 2-1, this is Falcon Leader. What's your status and intentions?" "Falcon Leader, I'm Colonel Patricia Hayes, 494th Fighter Squadron. I'm here as an observer for this evaluation, but I wanted to personally congratulate you on that mission execution. That was some of the finest tactical leadership I've seen in 20 years of flying." Colonel Hayes. Janice knew the name, one of the most decorated female pilots in the Air Force, with combat experience spanning 3 different conflicts. If Hayes was observing the evaluation, it meant people much higher up the chain of command were paying attention. "Thank you, ma'am," Janice replied. "Just doing my job, negative, Captain. What you just did was exceptional. Your tactical creativity under pressure, your ability to inspire confidence in your wingmen, and your flawless execution, that's not just doing your job. That's combat leadership at its finest." As they approached Nellis for landing, Janice saw a small crowd gathered near the flight line. Word of the morning's mission had apparently spread throughout the base, and pilots from other squadrons had come to watch the landing. After the shutdown, Captain Rodriguez approached Janice with an expression of genuine respect. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I had doubts about flying under your command. That was the best tactical leadership I've experienced since my deployment to Afghanistan." Lieutenant Davis, the young pilot who'd questioned her plan, was even more effusive. "Captain Carter, that was incredible. The way you kept track of all 4 aircraft while managing the tactical picture I've never seen anything like it." But the real surprise came when Captain Sullivan, one of Brennan's most loyal supporters, pulled her aside. "Janice, I need to say something," Sullivan began, using her first name for the first time since she'd joined the squadron. "I've been wrong about you, dead wrong. What you did up there today, that wasn't emotional instability. That was emotional intelligence applied to tactical problems. You didn't just think about completing the mission. You thought about bringing everyone home safely. That's the kind of leader I'd follow anywhere." Word of the morning's success had clearly reached the evaluation board. When Janice reported for the afternoon scenario, she found the observation room packed with senior officers, including Colonel Hayes and several others she didn't recognize. The final test was designed to be the ultimate psychological challenge. A search and rescue mission where the survivor was a captured pilot being held by enemy forces. The scenario included not just tactical complexity, but moral ambiguity. Intelligence suggested the rescue attempt might trigger executions of other prisoners. "Falcon Flight, this is a magic controller," came the briefing. "Your mission is to extract Major Jennifer Walsh from the enemy compound at grid reference 12 November 445. Be advised, intelligence indicates the enemy is holding multiple prisoners. A rescue attempt may result in additional casualties." It was the ultimate no-win scenario, designed to force pilots into impossible moral calculations. Save one pilot and possibly condemn others, or abandon the rescue to protect unknown prisoners. But as Janice studied the intelligence briefings and target imagery, she began to see possibilities that others had missed. The compound layout, the timing of guard rotations, the terrain features. There might be a way to extract Walsh without triggering wider retaliation. "Magic, this is Falcon Leader," she transmitted, requesting modification to mission parameters. "I believe we can extract the primary target while minimizing risk to other prisoners." "Falcon Leader, explain your proposal." "The compound has a vulnerable point in its southeastern perimeter. If we create a diversion in the north while simultaneously extracting from the southeast, we can make it appear that Major Walsh escaped during the confusion rather than being rescued. Enemy forces won't realize rescue forces were involved." The radio was silent for several seconds. Then Colonel Hayes' voice came through clearly. "Falcon Leader, you are cleared to execute your modified plan. Show us what you can do." What followed was the most complex military operation Janice had ever coordinated. Using a combination of electronic warfare, precision strikes, and carefully timed diversions, she orchestrated a rescue that appeared to enemy forces like a successful escape attempt rather than an external extraction. The mission succeeded beyond all expectations. Walsh was recovered safely, the compound's other prisoners were unharmed, and enemy forces remained unaware that American aircraft had been involved in the operation. But more importantly, Janice had demonstrated something that went beyond tactical proficiency. She'd shown that emotional investment in protecting lives could actually enhance rather than compromise tactical effectiveness. As she climbed down from her aircraft after the final mission, Janice found herself surrounded by pilots and ground crew who'd been following the evaluation. The reception was unlike anything she'd experienced, genuine respect and admiration from peers who'd previously viewed her with skepticism. Colonel Hayes approached as the crowd began to disperse. "Captain Carter, I need to speak with you privately," she said, her expression serious. They walked to a quiet area away from the flight line, where Hayes stopped and turned to face her directly. "Janice, I'm going to be blunt with you. This evaluation was designed to fail you. Lieutenant Colonel Brennan and certain elements within the Air Force hierarchy wanted to use your emotional responses as justification for limiting women's roles in combat aviation." The confirmation of what Janice had suspected hit like a physical blow. "Ma'am, but here's the thing," Hayes continued. "You didn't just pass their tests, you redefined what success looks like. Your tactical innovations, your leadership under pressure, your ability to think creatively about complex problems. That's not emotional instability. That's exactly the kind of thinking the Air Force needs more of. So what happens now? Hayes smiled. Now we find out if the Air Force is smart enough to recognize what they have in you. The evaluation board meets tomorrow morning to make their deployment recommendations. I'll be making my own recommendation to the Pentagon based on what I've observed. That evening, as Janice sat in her temporary quarters reviewing the past 2 days, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: confidence in her own abilities. Not just her technical skills, but her approach to leadership and decision-making. Her phone buzzed with a text from Major Thompson, back at Edwards. Heard through the grapevine that you're making waves at Nellis. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. The whole wing is pulling for you. Another message came from her sister Rebecca. Dad would be so proud of what you're accomplishing. You're not just proving yourself, you're changing the game for everyone. Who comes after you? As Janice prepared for sleep, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. Tomorrow would bring the evaluation board's decision, but regardless of the outcome, she'd proven something important to herself. Her emotions weren't a weakness to be overcome. They were a strength to be harnessed. Her caring about the mission and the people involved wasn't a liability. It was what made her exceptional. The question now was whether the United States Air Force was ready to embrace that reality, or whether institutional bias would override the clear evidence of her capabilities. Either way, Janice Carter knew exactly who she was: a pilot who could fly any mission, lead any formation, and bring everyone home safely. The Air Force could choose to utilize that capability or waste it, but they could never again claim she wasn't qualified for combat. The deployment order arrived on a Thursday morning that felt like any other, but would mark the beginning of the most challenging chapter of Janice's military career. She was in the Squadron Operations Center at Edwards, reviewing maintenance reports on her assigned F-16, when Major Thompson burst through the door with an expression somewhere between excitement and concern. "Janice, you need to see this," Thompson sighed, holding up an official message with the distinctive red border of priority communications. The header read, "Deployment Authorization, Operation Desert Guardian, Classified." Janice scanned the document quickly, her heart rate climbing as she absorbed the details. She was being deployed to Al Dhafra Air Base in the United Arab Emirates as part of a rapid response squadron tasked with close air support missions in Syria and Iraq. The assignment was everything she'd trained for: real combat operations against active hostile forces. But the deployment came with an unexpected twist. "Look at the command structure," Thompson said, pointing to a specific section of the orders. Janice read the relevant passage and felt her stomach drop. Lieutenant Colonel Brennan was listed as squadron commander for the deployment, with Captain Sullivan as his deputy. Her name appeared further down the list, but with a notation that made her blood run cold. Special assignment, psychological. Monitoring required. What does that mean? Janice asked, though she suspected she already knew. "It means they're still questioning your fitness for combat," Thompson replied grimly. "You passed the evaluation at Nellis, but someone probably..." Brennan convinced higher headquarters to include ongoing psychological assessment as a condition of your deployment. Before Janice could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize with a Virginia area code. "Captain Carter, this is Colonel Hayes. I assume you've received your deployment orders?" "Yes, ma'am." "I'm trying to understand the psychological monitoring requirement." Hayes's sigh was audible through the phone. That was the compromise. The evaluation board wanted to deploy you based on your performance at Nellis, but certain elements within the command structure insisted on additional oversight. "You're going to be under a microscope, Janice. Every decision, every response, every moment of stress will be documented and analyzed." "Understood, ma'am. I won't let you down." I know you won't. But be aware, there are people hoping you will. They want to use any sign of emotional response as justification for pulling women out of combat roles permanently. The stakes are higher than just your career now. 3 weeks later, Janice found herself stepping off a C-130 transport aircraft into the blazing heat of the Arabian Peninsula. Al Dhafra Air Base was a joint facility home to American, British, and Emirati forces conducting operations across the Middle East. The base hummed with constant activity, fighter jets launching and recovering, cargo planes delivering supplies, and personnel from a dozen different nations working together in the global war against terrorism. The 455th Expeditionary Fighter Squadron's facilities were state-of-the-art, a far cry from the temporary structures that had housed previous Middle East deployments. Air-conditioned hangars protected the F-16s from sand and heat, while sophisticated communication systems linked the base to command centers around the world. Janice's new home was a small room in the officers' quarters, barely large enough for a bed, desk, and wall locker. The walls were thin enough that she could hear conversations from neighboring rooms, and the constant roar of aircraft operations provided a backdrop that never truly faded. Her first briefing came 6 hours after arrival, barely enough time to unpack and grab a quick meal at the dining facility. The squadron gathered in a secure conference room where classified mission data could be discussed without fear of compromise. Lieutenant Colonel Brennan stood at the front of the room, looking every bit the combat commander in his desert flight. Suit adorned with patches from previous deployments. His expression when he spotted Janice was carefully neutral, but she caught the slight tightening around his eyes that suggested their previous conflicts hadn't been forgotten. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Operation Desert Guardian," Brennan began, activating a large display screen that showed a map of Syria and Iraq. "Our mission is to provide close air support for coalition ground forces engaged in counterterrorism operations against ISIS and other hostile elements." The briefing covered rules of engagement, target identification procedures, and communication protocols with ground forces. But what struck Janice most was the complexity of the operational environment. Unlike the clear-cut scenarios from training, real combat involved multiple friendly forces, civilian populations, and political considerations that could change rapidly. "Captain Carter," Brennan said, and Janice felt every eye in the room turn toward her. "You'll be flying primarily close air support missions. These operations require split-second decisions about weapon deployment in proximity to friendly forces and civilian areas. Any hesitation or emotional compromise could result in friendly fire incidents or mission failure." The message was clear. Brennan was setting her up for failure by assigning her the most psychologically challenging missions available. "Understood, sir," Janice replied evenly. "I'm ready for any mission you assign." After the briefing, she was approached by Captain Lisa Park, a pilot she hadn't met before. Park was around 30, with the confident bearing of someone who'd seen actual combat. "First deployment?" Park asked as they walked toward the flight line. "First combat deployment," Janice clarified. "You?" "Third tour." "Afghanistan twice then." "Libya. I heard about your evaluation at Nellis. Pretty impressive flying from what people are saying." They paused near a row of F-16s being prepared for the next day's missions. In the distance, the sun was setting over the desert, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "Can I give you some advice?" Park continued. "Combat is different from training in ways you can't imagine until you experience it. The stress isn't just from flying or tactics, it's from knowing that your decisions have real consequences for real people. Some pilots freeze up when they realize that. Others become reckless. The ones who succeed are the ones who can stay focused on the mission while still caring about the outcome." "Sounds like you're describing emotional balance, not emotional suppression," Janice observed. Park smiled. "Exactly. Don't let them convince you that caring makes you weak. Some of the best combat pilots I've known were the ones who cared the most about doing the job right. That evening, Janice attended her first operational briefing for the next day's missions. The intelligence picture was sobering. ISIS forces had been conducting attacks against coalition-supported Iraqi forces near the city of Mosul. American ground advisors were embedded with Iraqi units, making close air support. Both critical and extremely dangerous. Weather will be clear with good visibility, reported the intelligence officer, a young lieutenant who looked like he'd just graduated from college. Enemy forces are estimated at company strength, with possible heavy weapons and anti-aircraft systems. Our ground forces will be marked with infrared strobes visible through night vision systems. Major Reynolds, the squadron's operations officer, pointed to specific locations on the aerial imagery. Primary targets are enemy strong points and vehicle concentrations. Rules of engagement are weapons type positive identification required before engaging any target. Minimum safe distance from friendly forces is 200 meters for guided munitions, 500 meters for general-purpose bombs. Janice studied the target area carefully, noting the proximity of civilian structures to suspected enemy positions. This would be precision work requiring perfect coordination between air and ground forces. Flight assignments, Reynolds continued. Viper flight will be Captain Sullivan and Captain Mitchell. Falcon flight will be Captain Carter and Captain Rodriguez. Time on station, 0800 hours, 4 hours of continuous coverage. As the briefing concluded, Janice felt the familiar pre-mission mixture of anticipation and anxiety. But this time, it carried additional weight. This would be her first real combat mission, and everyone would be watching to see how she performed under actual fire. Captain Rodriguez caught up with her as they left the briefing room. "You ready for this, Carter?" "As ready as anyone can be for their first time," she replied honestly. "Good attitude. My advice: trust your training, communicate constantly with the ground controller, and don't overthink it. You've got the skills. Now you just need to apply them when it matters." At 0600 hours the next morning, Janice began her pre-flight procedures in the cool pre-dawn darkness. The routine was identical to hundreds of training flights: checking weather, reviewing mission materials, inspecting her aircraft, but everything felt different, knowing that in 2 hours, she'd be flying over hostile territory where people would be actively trying to kill her. Her F-16, tail number 880147, had been meticulously prepared by her crew chief, Staff Sergeant Wilson. The aircraft carried a mixed load of precision-guided bombs and 20mm ammunition, enough firepower to destroy a city block, but requiring surgical precision to use effectively. "She's ready to go, Captain," Wilson reported as Janice completed her exterior inspection. "All systems green, weapons checked and armed. Bring her home safe." The flight to the combat area took 45 minutes, during which Janice monitored multiple radio frequencies while scanning for threats. The landscape below changed gradually from the organized geometry of military bases to the ancient patterns of Middle Eastern cities and farms, and finally to the scarred terrain of an active war zone. "Falcon flight, this is Warrior 6, came the voice of the ground controller as they approached the target area. "We have troops in contact, danger, close situation. Multiple enemy positions engaging our forces from compounded grid. 38 Sierra 567. Janice checked her moving map display and immediately saw the problem. The enemy compound was less than 300 meters from the friendly forces' position, well within the danger radius for most of their munitions. "Warrior 6, this is Falcon 1, she replied. "I see your positions. Recommend we use precision-guided munitions with reduced warheads to minimize blast radius. Falcon 1, negative on reduced warheads. Enemy positions are hardened targets requiring full explosive effect. You need to make this work within dangerous close parameters." This was exactly the scenario. Brennan had warned about a situation requiring split-second decisions about weapon employment near friendly forces. Any hesitation could allow the enemy to inflict casualties on coalition troops. Any mistake could result in friendly fire, but as Janice studied the tactical picture, she began to see possibilities that pure procedural thinking might miss. The compound's layout, the prevailing wind direction, the terrain features. There might be a way to achieve the required explosive effect while directing the blast away from friendly forces. Falcon 2, this is Falcon 1, she transmitted to Rodriguez. I'm going to try a steep angle attack from the north. The compound walls should direct most of the blast southward, away from our people. Falcon 1, that's outside normal attack parameters, Rodriguez replied. Are you sure about this? Janice studied the geometry one more time, calculating blast patterns and fragment trajectories in her head. It would work, but it required flying directly through the most heavily defended airspace at an angle that would expose her aircraft to maximum enemy fire. Warrior 6 Falcon 1 is inbound with precision strike. 30 seconds, she announced. Banking her aircraft into the attack run, what happened next would be replayed in her memory for years to come. As she dove toward the target, automatic weapons fire began rising from multiple positions around the compound. Her threat warning system screamed as surface-to-air missiles attempted to lock onto her aircraft. But she held the attack run steady, waiting for the perfect moment to release. Her weapon. The bomb impacted exactly where she'd aimed it, and the blast pattern unfolded exactly as she'd calculated. The enemy position was destroyed while friendly forces remained unharmed, despite being well within the normal danger radius. Falcon 1, this is Warrior 6, came the ground controller's voice, filled with amazement. Outstanding strike. Threat neutralized, no friendly casualties. How did you manage that angle? Just applied some creative thinking to the ballistics problem, Janice replied. But she knew it was more than that. Her emotional investment in protecting coalition forces had driven her to find a solution that purely technical thinking might have missed. As they flew back toward Al Dafra, Captain Rodriguez's voice came through her headset on a discreet frequency. Janice, that was some of the finest combat flying I've ever witnessed. You didn't just complete the mission, you redefined what was possible. But Janice knew the real test was just beginning. Word of her successful combat debut would spread quickly through the squadron and up the chain of command. Some would see it as validation of her capabilities. Others would find ways to criticize her methods or question her decision-making process. The psychological monitoring that was part of her deployment meant that every aspect of her performance would be scrutinized by people looking for evidence to support their preconceptions. She'd won this battle, but the war for acceptance was far from over. As Al Dafra came into view on the horizon, Janice reflected on what she'd learned during her first taste of combat. The emotional intensity was even greater than she'd expected. But rather than compromising her performance, it had enhanced her ability to find creative solutions to complex problems. Now, she had to prove that this success wasn't a fluke, and that emotional intelligence could be a consistent advantage in the chaos and complexity of modern warfare. 6 weeks into her deployment, Janice had flown 23 combat missions without a single incident. Her precision in close air support had earned grudging respect from ground controllers, and even some of her squadron mates were beginning to acknowledge her tactical expertise. But success in combat had an unexpected consequence. It made the psychological monitoring more intense. Not less. Dr. Amanda Foster, the Air Force psychologist assigned to evaluate Janice's deployment performance, arrived at Al Dafra on a Tuesday morning that would change everything. Unlike Dr. Chun's clinical approach at Nellis, Foster seemed determined to find problems where none existed. Captain Carter, I've reviewed your mission reports and post-flight interviews, Foster said during their first meeting at a cramped office near the Squadron Operations Center. Your emotional responses to combat situations show concerning patterns. Janice sat across from the psychologist, trying to maintain professional composure despite her growing frustration. "Ma'am, could you be more specific about these concerning patterns? Your physiological monitors during close air support missions show elevated stress responses specifically when friendly forces are threatened. Your voice pattern analysis indicates emotional investment that exceeds normal professional concern." Foster consulted her tablet, scrolling through data that reduced Janice's combat performance to clinical measurements. "Doctor, caring about mission success and force protection seems like appropriate professional behavior," Janice replied carefully. "But the degree of your emotional response suggests potential for compromised judgment. What happens when you're forced to choose between mission objectives and protecting personnel? You've developed emotional attachments too." It was a loaded question designed to create doubt about Janice's fitness for command. But before she could respond, the conversation was interrupted by the base alarm system, 3 sharp blasts, followed by the announcement that would test everything she'd trained for. All personnel. We have multiple aircraft declaring emergency inbound to Al Dafra. Medical and fire rescue teams report to stations immediately. This is not a drill." Janice and Dr. Foster rushed outside to see 2 F-16s approaching, the airfield trailing smoke and flying in formation with obvious difficulty. Even from the ground, it was clear both aircraft had sustained significant battle damage. "Falcon Flight declaring emergency," came Captain Park's voice over the base radio frequency, strain evident in every word. "Falcon 2 has severe hydraulic failure and battle damage. Falcon 1 has engine problems and partial flight control damage. Requesting immediate emergency landing, fire trucks on standby." Janice felt her heart rate spike as she realized her squadron mates were in serious trouble. Park was flying the damaged aircraft with Captain Anderson as her wingman, both returning from a combat mission that had clearly gone very wrong. "Tower, Falcon Flight," Park continued, her voice fighting to remain professional. "Be advised we took heavy ground fire over the target area. Multiple SAM launches, several direct hits. Falcon 2 has lost primary hydraulic systems and has minimal flight control authority. The situation deteriorated rapidly as the aircraft approached for landing." Falcon 2, Anderson's aircraft, was clearly in worse condition than initially reported. The F-16 was leaking hydraulic fluid and flying at an unusual angle that suggested major structural damage. "Falcon 2, this is a tower," came the air traffic controller's voice. "Your aircraft appears to have significant damage to your vertical stabilizer. Recommend you consider ejection over the desert rather than attempting landing." "Negative, Tower," Anderson replied, his voice tight with pain. "I've got wounded friends depending on the intel we collected. I'm bringing this bird home." Janice understood immediately what Anderson meant. Their mission had been to gather time-sensitive intelligence about enemy troop movements that would affect a major coalition operation scheduled for the following day. Losing that intelligence could cost lives on a much larger scale, but as Falcon 2 attempted its approach, disaster struck. The damaged aircraft suddenly rolled inverted and began an uncontrolled descent toward the runway. Anderson was fighting to regain control, but his hydraulic failure meant the aircraft wasn't responding to normal inputs. "Eject! Eject!" came multiple voices over the radio as Anderson's F-16 plummeted toward the ground. "Can't eject." Anderson's voice cracked with desperation. "Ejection seat malfunction. I'm stuck in this thing." The implications hit Janice like a physical blow. Anderson was trapped in an aircraft that was about to crash, and there was nothing anyone on the ground could do to help him. In less than 30 seconds, she was going to watch a fellow pilot die, but as she stared at the plummeting aircraft, an impossible idea began forming in her mind. Anderson's F-16 still had engine power. The problem was flight control authority. If someone could get close enough to provide guidance, maybe there was a way to help him regain control. "Dr. Foster," Janice said urgently, "I need you to document what I'm about to do as tactical decision-making under extreme stress, not emotional compromise." Before Foster could respond, Janice was running toward the flight line where her own F-16 was parked and ready for the next mission. Staff Sergeant Wilson, her crew chief, saw her coming and immediately began pulling the safety pins from her aircraft. "Captain, what's happening?" Wilson called out as Janice grabbed her helmet and survival gear. "I'm going to try something that's either brilliant or completely insane," Janice replied, strapping herself into the cockpit with record speed. "Tower, this is Falcon 3 requesting immediate emergency takeoff," she transmitted while starting her engines. "I have a plan to assist Falcon 2. Falcon 3, negative," came Lieutenant Colonel Brennan's voice over the radio. "You are not authorized for takeoff. Stand down immediately." But Janice was already rolling, her 1-6 accelerating down the runway as Anderson's damaged aircraft continued its death spiral above. She had perhaps 60 seconds to get airborne and attempt the most dangerous flying maneuver of her career. "Falcon 2, this is Falcon 3, she transmitted as her aircraft lifted off. "I'm coming up to provide formation guidance. Can you see me?" "Falcon 3, I can see you," Anderson replied, his voice filled with desperate hope. "But I can't. Control this thing. The stick isn't responding to anything." Janice pulled her F-16 into a steep climb, racing to intercept Anderson's aircraft before it impacted the ground. The geometry was brutal. She had to match his rate of descent while simultaneously providing visual references he could use to regain some semblance of control. "Falcon 2, look at my aircraft," she commanded, pulling alongside Anderson's damaged F-16 at an altitude that left no room for error. "I'm going to fly formation with you and talk you through this. You still have engine power, which means you have some control authority." What followed was the most precise flying of Janice's life. She positioned her aircraft so that Anderson could use her F-16 as a visual reference, effectively becoming his flight controls when his own system failed. By carefully adjusting her position and calling out specific power settings, she helped him transform an uncontrolled descent into something resembling a controlled approach. "Falcon 2, add power now," she called out as they descended through 500 feet above the runway. "You're descending too fast." "Small power addition. Your throttle response is still working." "It's working," Anderson replied, his voice filled with amazement. "I can feel the aircraft responding." But they weren't safe yet. The approach was still dangerously unstable, and Anderson's hydraulic failure meant landing would be nearly impossible under normal circumstances. Janice would have to maintain formation all the way to touchdown, providing guidance through the most critical phase of flight. "Falcon 2, you're drifting left of center line," she called out as they approached the runway threshold. "Small right. Rudder input, your rudder should still have some authority." The landing was unlike anything air traffic controllers had ever witnessed. Two F-16s touching down simultaneously, with one pilot flying formation so close that their wingtips were separated by less than 10 feet. Anderson's aircraft hit hard and immediately veered off the runway, but he was alive and the intelligence data was intact as both pilots shut down their engines. Emergency vehicles swarmed Anderson's damaged aircraft while Janice completed her own post-flight procedures. Her hands were shaking from adrenaline, but she felt a profound sense of satisfaction. She'd saved a fellow pilot's life through pure flying skill and innovative thinking. But as she climbed down from her cockpit, she found Lieutenant Colonel Brennan waiting with an expression of barely controlled fury. "Captain Carter, what you just did was the most reckless, insubordinate display I've witnessed in 20 years of military service," Brennan said, his voice loud enough for everyone on the flight line to hear. "You violated direct orders, endangered government property, and compromised flight safety with an unauthorized formation approach. "Sir, I saved Captain Anderson's life," Janice replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "You got lucky," Brennan shot back. That was not tactical thinking. That was emotional decision-making that could have resulted in 2 aircraft losses instead of 1. This is exactly the kind of compromised judgment we've been monitoring. Dr. Foster appeared beside them, her tablet in hand and her expression troubled. "Captain Carter, your physiological responses during the emergency showed extreme emotional stress. Your decision to attempt the rescue was made in an emotionally compromised state." Janice felt the walls closing in around her. No matter what she accomplished, no matter how many lives she saved or missions she completed successfully, her emotional responses were being characterized as evidence of unfitness for combat. "Doctor, with respect, extreme emotional stress was the appropriate response to watching a fellow pilot about to die," Janice said, her voice rising despite her efforts to remain professional. "If caring about my squadron mates' lives makes me unfit for combat, then maybe the evaluation criteria need to be reconsidered. Captain Carter, you are hereby grounded pending a full investigation of today's incident," Brennan declared. "Report to Dr. Foster's office tomorrow morning for complete psychological reevaluation." As the crowd on the flight line began to disperse, Captain Park approached Janice with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," Park said simply. "Tom Anderson is alive because you cared enough to risk everything to save him." "It doesn't matter," Janice replied, watching Brennan stride away toward the operations building. "They're going to use this as proof that I'm too emotional for combat. My career is over." "Maybe," Park said, "but you saved a life today, and everyone on this base saw it happen. Sometimes doing the right thing is more important than following orders." That evening, as Janice sat in her quarters writing what she expected would be her final mission report, she received an encrypted message on her secure communications device. The sender was Colonel Hayes. "Janice, word of today's events has reached the Pentagon. There are people who want to use this incident to end your combat career permanently. But there are also people who recognize what you accomplished. The fight isn't over, but the next few days will determine everything. Stay strong and remember, you've already proven you're exactly the kind of pilot the Air Force needs. Now you have to prove the Air Force is smart enough to recognize it." As she prepared for what might be her last night as a combat pilot, Janice reflected on the impossible position she found herself in. Her greatest strength, her emotional investment in protecting the people she served with, was being characterized as her greatest weakness. Tomorrow would bring the psychological evaluation. That could end her career. But regardless of the outcome, she knew she'd made the right choice. Captain Anderson was alive. His family wouldn't receive a notification of his death, and his intelligence data would help protect coalition forces in the coming operation. If that made her too emotional for combat, then perhaps the problem wasn't with her emotions. Perhaps the problem was with a system that valued conformity over innovation and compliance over courage. The crisis had arrived, and everything she'd worked for hung in the balance. The emergency call came at 0347 hours, shattering the pre-dawn silence at Al Dafra with an urgency that sent adrenaline coursing through every pilot on base. Janice jolted awake in her quarters, instantly alert, despite having been grounded for 3 days following the Anderson rescue incident. The base's public address system crackled to life with a message that would change everything. "All available pilots report to the operations center immediately. We have a developing situation requiring immediate air support. This is not a drill." Through her small window, Janice could see the flight line erupting into activity. Ground crews were pulling aircraft out of hangars while pilots ran toward the operations building in various states of dress. Whatever was happening, it was big enough to wake the entire base. Despite her grounded status, Janice pulled on her flight suit and headed toward the operations center. She might not be authorized to fly, but she needed to understand what crisis was unfolding. The operations center was in controlled chaos when she arrived. Multiple large screens displayed tactical maps of Syria and Iraq, while radio operators coordinated with forces across the region. Lieutenant Colonel Brennan stood at the center of it all, his face grim as he absorbed reports from multiple sources simultaneously. "Listen up, people," Brennan announced as pilots filled the briefing room. Approximately 2 hours ago, a coalition Special Operations team conducting a high-value target raid near Raqqa was compromised. 12 operators from multiple nations are currently surrounded and under heavy attack from ISIS forces estimated at battalion strength. The tactical display showed the operators' position, a compound in the middle of hostile territory, more than 60 miles from the nearest friendly forces. Red icons indicated enemy positions completely surrounding the isolated team. Current air assets on station include 2 Apache helicopters, providing close air support, but they're running low on fuel and ammunition, Brennan continued. The team has wounded personnel who require immediate medical evacuation, but the landing zone is too hot for rescue helicopters. Major Reynolds stepped forward with additional details. Weather over the target area is deteriorating rapidly. Low-level clouds and dust storms are reducing visibility to less than 2 miles. The Apaches will have to depart the station in approximately 30 minutes for refueling, leaving the team without air support. Janice felt her stomach tighten as she realized the implications. 12 elite operators were about to be abandoned to overwhelming enemy forces because of weather conditions and fuel limitations. Available assets for immediate deployment, Reynolds continued, are limited due to maintenance issues and ongoing operations. We have 6 F-16s mission capable, but only 4 qualified pilots available for immediate launch. Brennan's eyes swept across the assembled pilots. Captain Sullivan, Captain Mitchell, Captain Rodriguez, and Captain Park, you're authorized for immediate launch. The mission is close air support and combat search and rescue preparation. Sir, Captain Park raised her hand. 4 aircraft may not be sufficient for a battalion-strength enemy force. We're going to need additional firepower and coordination. I'm aware of the limitations, Captain. We launch with what we have and adapt as the situation develops. That's when Captain Anderson, still moving slowly due to injuries from his crash 3 days earlier, spoke up from the back of the room. "Colonel, what about Captain Carter? She's our most experienced close air support pilot, and she's mission qualified on all our current loadouts." Brennan's face darkened. "Captain Carter is grounded pending psychological evaluation. She is not authorized for flight operations." "Sir, with respect," Anderson continued, "those operators are going to die without proper air support." "Captain, Carter saved my life 3 days ago through skill and courage that I've never seen matched. If anyone can get those people out alive, it's her." A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembled pilots. Janice felt every eye in the room turn toward her, but she remained silent, waiting to see how the situation would develop. Dr. Foster, who had been observing from the corner, stepped forward. "Colonel Brennan is correct. Captain Carter's psychological state makes her unsuitable for high-stress combat operations. Deploying her would be irresponsible." That's when an unexpected voice cut through the tension. "Dr. Foster, with all due respect, you're wrong." Everyone turned to see Captain Tom Anderson walking forward, his movements still stiff from his recent injuries, but his voice strong and clear. 3 days ago, I was going to die," Anderson continued. "My aircraft was out of control, my ejection seat had failed, and I had maybe 60 seconds before impact. Every regulation said I was beyond help. But Captain Carter didn't think about regulations. She thought about bringing me home alive." Anderson faced Brennan directly. "Sir, what she did wasn't emotional instability. It was tactical innovation under impossible circumstances. She saw a solution that no one else could see, because she cared enough to look for one." Before Brennan could respond, the radio operator called out urgently, "Colonel, we're receiving a transmission from the surrounded team. They're reporting wounded personnel and requesting immediate evacuation support." The voice that came through the speakers was strained but professional. "Any station. This is Guardian 6. We have 3 urgent medical cases and are taking heavy fire from multiple directions. We can hold our position for maybe another hour, but we need air support immediately." Janice found herself stepping forward before she'd consciously decided to speak. "Colonel Brennan, I request permission to volunteer for this mission." The room fell silent. Brennan stared at her with an expression somewhere between anger and calculation. "Captain Carter, you are grounded. That's a direct order." "Sir, I understand my status. But 12 operators are going to die unless someone provides adequate air support. You know my capabilities, and you know this mission requires precision. Flying in degraded weather conditions with maximum ordnance effects near friendly forces." Dr. Foster interjected, "Colonel, I must advise against this. Captain Carter's emotional investment in rescue operations could lead to compromised decision-making." That's when Captain Park spoke up, her voice cutting through the debate with surgical precision. "Doctor, Captain Carter's emotional investment is exactly why she's the best pilot for this mission. She doesn't just see targets on a screen, she sees real people who need help. That's not a weakness. It's what makes her exceptional." Captain Rodriguez nodded in agreement. "I've flown combat missions with Carter for 2 months. Her tactical thinking under pressure is the best I've encountered. Those operators need her skills." The radio crackled again with another transmission from the besieged team. "Guardian 6 to any air asset. Enemy forces are massing for assault. We have maybe 30 minutes before they overrun our position." Brennan stood silently for a long moment, clearly torn between his personal bias against Janice and the tactical reality that she might be their best hope for mission success. That's when an encrypted message appeared on his communication device. Brennan read it quickly, his expression shifting from resistance to resignation. "Captain Carter," he said finally, "you are temporarily reinstated to flight status for this mission only. You will fly as flight leader with Captain Park as your wingman. Mission success and safe return of coalition personnel is your priority." Dr. Foster looked stunned. "Colonel, I must protest this decision." "The psychological risks, Doctor," Brennan interrupted. "The message I just received is from General Morrison at Central Command. He's been monitoring this situation and specifically requested Captain Carter's participation, if available. Apparently, her reputation has reached the Pentagon." Janice felt a surge of gratitude mixed with determination. Someone at the highest levels of command had enough confidence in her abilities to override local objections. "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." "See that you don't, Captain." "And Carter," Brennan paused, his expression softening slightly, "bring our people home." 20 minutes later, Janice was strapping herself into the cockpit of her F-16, her aircraft loaded with a mix of precision-guided bombs and cannon ammunition optimized for close air support. The pre-flight routine felt different this time, more focused, more purposeful than any mission she'd flown before. "Falcon Flight, this is Magic Controller," came the voice through her headset as she taxied toward the runway. "Be advised, weather over the target area is deteriorating rapidly. Visibility is down to 1 mile with scattered thunderstorms. Additionally, enemy air defenses have been active in the region." "Magic Falcon Flight copies," Janice replied. "We understand the risks and accept the mission." The flight to the target area took 35 minutes through increasingly hostile weather. Storm clouds towered above them like gray monuments, while dust and haze reduced visibility to barely adequate levels. But as they approached the coordinates, Janice could see the reality of the situation unfolding below. The Special Operations Team was trapped in a small compound, surrounded by enemy positions that seemed to stretch in every direction. Muzzle Flashes lit up the gathering dusk as automatic weapons fire poured into the defender's position from multiple angles. Guardian 6, this is Falcon 1, Janice transmitted. We're on station with close air support. Can you mark your position? Falcon 1, Guardian 6, we're in the two-story building at the center of the compound. Enemy positions are in buildings and fighting positions surrounding us at distances between 50 and 200 meters. Janice studied the tactical picture through her targeting pod. The situation was even worse than the briefing had indicated. The enemy had positioned themselves in civilian structures throughout the area, making precision strikes extremely difficult without risking collateral damage. Guardian 6, this is Falcon 1. I need you to mark the highest priority target with an infrared strobe. We'll work our way through the threat ring, starting with the most immediate dangers. What followed was the most complex close air support mission of Janice's career. For the next hour, she and Captain Park systematically eliminated enemy positions using a combination of precision-guided munitions and cannon fire. Each strike required split-second calculations to ensure maximum effect on enemy forces while minimizing risk to the surrounding operators. Falcon 1, Guardian 6, came the team leader's voice after their fifth successful strike. You've cleared our northern perimeter. We can move our wounded to the landing zone now. But as the rescue helicopter approached through the deteriorating weather, disaster struck. A surface-to-air missile launched from a concealed position, forcing the helicopter to abort its approach and leave the operators stranded once again. Guardian 6, this is Falcon 1, Janice transmitted grimly. The SAM site is concealed somewhere in the village. We need to find it before the helicopter can attempt another approach. The search for the missile site became a deadly game of cat and mouse. The enemy operators knew they'd revealed their position and were trying to relocate before being detected. Meanwhile, the Special Operations Team was running low on ammunition and medical supplies for their wounded. That's when Janice made a decision that would define her career and possibly her life. Falcon 2, this is Falcon 1. I'm going to conduct a low-level reconnaissance pass to draw fire from concealed positions. When they reveal themselves, you take them out. Falcon 1, that's incredibly dangerous, Park replied. They'll throw everything they have at you. Guardian 6 has people bleeding out down there. Someone has to take the risk. Janice pushed her F-16 into a shallow dive that brought her within 500 feet of the ground, well within range of small arms fire and portable air defense systems. It was the kind of flying that violated every safety protocol, but it was also the only way to force hidden enemy positions to reveal themselves. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Automatic weapons fire and shoulder-launched missiles erupted from positions throughout the village as Janice's aircraft screamed overhead. Her threat warning system became a continuous scream of alarm tones, but she held her course until Park could identify and engage the SAM site. Falcon 1, Falcon 2 has the SAM site marked. Break off the attack now. Janice pulled into a climbing turn as Park's bomb impacted the concealed missile position with devastating effect. The explosion eliminated the air defense threat and opened the way for rescue operations. Guardian 6, this is Falcon 1. The landing zone is clear. Recommend immediate extraction. The rescue helicopter swept in through the storm, landing just long enough to collect the 12 operators and their wounded before disappearing back into the night. As the helicopter cleared the area safely, Janice felt a profound sense of completion. She'd saved 12 lives through precision flying and tactical innovation under impossible conditions. More importantly, she'd proven that emotional investment in mission success was an asset, not a liability. But as she and Captain Park flew back toward Al Dafra through the storm, Janice knew the real battle was just beginning. Her unauthorized low-level pass would be analyzed and criticized. Her decision-making would be questioned and her emotional responses pathologized once again. The difference this time was that she no longer cared what the critics thought. She'd found her true calling as a pilot who could bring people home safely, regardless of the obstacles. Whether the Air Force chose to recognize that capability was their decision to make. Falcon 1, this is Magic Controller, came the transmission as they approached base. Be advised you have priority landing clearance and VIP reception committee waiting. As Al Dafra came into view through the storm, Janice could see that something had changed. The flight line was filled with personnel despite the late hour, and she could make out flags and camera crews near the operations building. Whatever happened next, her life as an anonymous combat pilot was over. The question now was whether she'd be celebrated as a hero or court-martialed for insubordination. Either way, 12 operators were alive because she'd refused to let regulations override human compassion. And that, she decided, was worth whatever consequences might follow. The reception committee waiting at Al Dafra was unlike anything Janice had ever seen in her military career. As she taxied her F-16 toward the parking area, she could make out news crews, senior officers with stars on their shoulders, and what appeared to be civilian officials in suits standing near the operations building despite the late hour. Falcon 1, this is ground control, came the radio transmission. Taxi to spot 7 Alpha. You have distinguished visitors waiting. Janice's hands were still shaking slightly from adrenaline as she shut down her engines and began the post-flight checklist. Through her canopy, she could see Staff Sergeant Wilson approaching with a ground crew, but his usual casual demeanor had been replaced by something approaching reverence. Outstanding flying tonight, Captain, Wilson said as he positioned the ladder beside her aircraft. Word is you saved a dozen special operators single-handedly. It was a team effort, Wilson. Captain Park deserves equal credit. But as Janice climbed down from her cockpit, she realized the crowd gathering around her aircraft wasn't interested in hearing about team efforts. Camera flashes went off as reporters documented her every move, while a 3-star general she didn't recognize approached with an expression of genuine admiration. Captain Carter, I'm General Patricia Morrison, Deputy Commander of Central Command, the general said, extending her hand. What you accomplished tonight represents the finest traditions of American air power and military courage. Before Janice could respond, she noticed Lieutenant Colonel Brennan standing slightly apart from the crowd, his expression unreadable. Their eyes met for a moment, and she saw something in his face she'd never seen before: respect, perhaps even admiration. Dr. Foster was notably absent from the reception committee. Generally, I appreciate the recognition, but I was just doing my job, Janice replied, trying to deflect the attention. Captain, 12 elite operators from 4 different nations are alive tonight because of your tactical innovation and flying skills. The Prime Ministers of Britain and Australia have personally called the President to express their gratitude for your actions. The full weight of what she'd accomplished began to sink in. This wasn't just about her career anymore. She'd become a symbol of American military capability on the international stage. General Morrison continued, I understand you've faced significant challenges regarding your emotional fitness for combat operations. After reviewing tonight's mission recordings and consulting with the operators you rescued, I can say definitively that those concerns were misguided. She handed Janice a folder marked with the Pentagon's official seal. Captain, you're being reassigned to a new position that I think you'll find interesting. The Air Force is establishing a new close air support training program focused on high-stress rescue operations. You've been selected as the primary instructor and curriculum developer. Janice opened the folder and saw orders transferring her to Nellis Air Force Base, not as a student this time, but as an instructor with the prestigious weapons school. The assignment was everything she'd dreamed of and more. Ma'am, I'm honored. But I have to ask, what about the psychological evaluation findings? Dr. Foster was quite clear about my unfitness for combat operations, General Morrison's expression hardened slightly. Dr. Foster's evaluation methods have been reviewed and found to be fundamentally flawed. Her approach of pathologizing emotional investment in mission success runs counter to everything we know about effective military leadership. The general gestured toward the crowd of personnel who had gathered to witness the post-mission reception. "Captain, look around. Every person here understands what you accomplished tonight. You didn't save those operators despite your emotional investment. You saved them because of it." 3 days later, Janice found herself in a very different setting, the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes, where a formal ceremony was being held to recognize her actions. The room was filled with senior military officers, government officials, and media representatives from around the world. Her family had flown in from Texas for the ceremony. Her mother sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter receive recognition that had once seemed impossible. Rebecca, her sister, had taken leave from her surgical residency to attend, and even her usually stoic father seemed moved by the occasion. The Distinguished Flying Cross is awarded to Captain Janice Carter for extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial combat operations, the Secretary of the Air Force announced. Captain Carter's tactical innovation, exceptional flying skills, and unwavering commitment to mission success resulted in the successful rescue of 12 Coalition Special Operations personnel who would otherwise have been lost to enemy action. As the medal was pinned to her uniform, Janice reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the obstacle course at Edwards, where she'd first proven her capabilities, to the evaluation at Nellis, where she'd redefined what emotional fitness meant, to the combat missions where she demonstrated that caring deeply about people made her more effective, not less. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came after the formal ceremony, when she was approached by a young woman in Air Force Academy cadet uniform. "Captain Carter, I'm Cadet Sarah Jensen," the young woman said. "I'm studying aeronautical engineering at the Academy, and I've been following your story. I wanted to thank you for proving that women can excel in combat aviation roles." "Cadet, I didn't prove anything about women," Janice replied. "I proved something about the importance of caring deeply about your mission and the people you serve. That's not a gender-specific trait, it's a human trait that makes any pilot more effective." Jensen nodded thoughtfully. "Ma'am, I've been told that showing emotion is a sign of weakness in military aviation. How do you respond to that?" Janice smiled, remembering her own struggles with the same question. "Cadet, the strongest pilots I know are the ones who care most about bringing everyone home safely. Don't let anyone convince you that caring makes you weak. It makes you human, and humans are exactly what the military needs more of." 6 months later, Janice stood in front of her first class of student pilots at Nellis Air Force Base. The 20 pilots seated before her represented the cream of American military aviation experienced combat veterans selected for advanced tactical training. "Welcome to the Advanced Close Air Support and Combat Rescue course," she began. "Over the next 6 months, you'll learn tactical techniques that could save lives in the most challenging combat environments. But before we discuss tactics, I want to address something that's fundamental to everything we'll do here." She clicked to her first presentation slide, which showed a simple statement: emotional investment enhances performance. "Some of you may have heard that emotions have no place in a cockpit," Janice continued. "That's not just wrong, it's dangerous. The pilots who perform best under pressure are the ones who care most about mission success and the safety of the people they're protecting." Captain Mark Stevens, one of her students, raised his hand. "Ma'am, how do you balance emotional investment with the need for tactical objectivity?" "Excellent question, Captain. Caring about the outcome doesn't mean letting emotions override sound judgment. It means letting your emotional investment drive you to find creative solutions when standard procedures aren't sufficient." She clicked to the next slide, which showed aerial footage from her rescue of the Special Operations team. 6 months ago, 12 operators were surrounded by overwhelming enemy forces in deteriorating weather conditions. Standard procedures would have left them to die. But because I cared enough to look for alternatives, we found a way to bring them home. The training program Janice developed became the most sought-after assignment in the Air Force. Pilots who completed her course consistently demonstrated superior performance in high-stress situations, and her teaching methods were adopted by training programs across all branches of the military. But perhaps her greatest legacy was the cultural change she helped bring about within military aviation. The old mindset that equated emotional responses with weakness gradually gave way to recognition that emotional intelligence was a critical component of effective leadership. 2 years after her rescue mission, Janice received a letter that brought tears to her eyes. It was from Captain Anderson, who had been promoted and was now serving as a squadron commander himself. "Dear Janice," the letter began, "I wanted you to know that last week I had to make a decision about one of my pilots who was being criticized for showing too much concern about civilian casualties during a combat mission. Instead of viewing her emotional responses as a weakness, I remembered what you taught all of us, that caring deeply about the mission and the people we protect is what makes us better pilots, not worse ones." That pilot's name is Lieutenant Sarah Jensen. She graduated from the academy last year and specifically requested an assignment to combat aviation because of your example. She's becoming an exceptional pilot, and I believe she'll make the same kind of difference you've made. Thank you for proving that the best pilots aren't the ones who feel nothing. They're the ones who feel everything and still perform when it matters most. 5 years after her deployment to Al Dafra, Janice found herself back in the Pentagon, but this time in a very different role. She'd been promoted to lieutenant colonel and selected to Air Force's new Psychological Resilience and Performance Enhancement Program, an initiative designed to help pilots integrate emotional intelligence with tactical effectiveness. Her office wall was decorated with letters from pilots around the world who had been inspired by her story. Photos from successful rescue missions performed by pilots she'd trained, and a simple plaque that read, "Caring is not weakness, it's strength applied with precision." During one particularly satisfying day, she received a video call from Captain Park, who was now serving as a squadron commander in Europe. "Janice, I wanted to share some news," Park said, her smile visible even through the encrypted video connection. "Remember that special operations team you rescued? Their commander, Major Johnson, just got promoted to colonel. In his promotion ceremony speech, he specifically mentioned that mission and said you epitomized everything the military should value in its aviators." "That's wonderful news," Janice replied. "But the real victory is that we're finally recognizing emotional intelligence as a tactical advantage rather than a liability." "Speaking of which," Park continued, "I just finished reading your new training manual. It's being distributed to every fighter squadron in NATO. You're literally changing how an entire generation of pilots thinks about the relationship between emotion and performance." As the call ended, Janice reflected on how far she'd come from that first day at Edwards when Lieutenant Colonel Brennan had questioned whether she was too emotional for combat. She'd proven that emotional investment didn't compromise tactical effectiveness. It enhanced it. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. When she opened it, she found a photo of 12 men and women in military uniforms from various nations, standing together and smiling. The accompanying message read, "Captain Carter, this is the Special Operations Team you rescued 3 years ago. We're all still serving, all still alive, and all still grateful for your courage and skill. You didn't just save our lives, you proved that the best warriors are the ones who fight with both skill and heart. Thank you for showing the world that caring deeply doesn't make you weak, it makes you unstoppable." That evening, as Janice drove home to her apartment near the Pentagon, she thought about the young woman she'd been when this journey began. Someone who'd been told she was too emotional, too invested, too caring to succeed in combat aviation. She'd proven them wrong not by becoming less emotional, but by demonstrating that emotional intelligence, when properly channeled, was the secret weapon that separated good pilots from exceptional ones. Her phone rang as she pulled into her parking space. The caller ID showed her sister Rebecca's number. "Hey, fighter pilot," Rebecca said, using the nickname she'd given Janice years ago. "I just wanted to tell you that I used your story in a lecture today about the importance of empathy in medicine. My students were fascinated to learn that caring deeply about patients doesn't compromise clinical judgment, it enhances it." "Sounds familiar," Janice laughed. "Almost like caring is a fundamental human strength that makes us better at whatever we do." "Exactly. You know what Dad would say if he could see what you've accomplished?" Janice smiled, thinking of her father's lessons about courage and compassion. "He'd probably say that the strongest people aren't the ones who don't feel anything. They're the ones who feel everything and still do what needs to be done." "Perfect. You've become exactly the kind of person he hoped you'd become. A warrior with a heart." As Janice ended the call and walked toward her apartment, she felt a profound sense of satisfaction. She'd started her career being told she was too emotional to fly in combat. She'd ended it proving that emotional intelligence was exactly what combat aviation needed more of. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new pilots to train, and new opportunities to demonstrate that caring deeply about the mission and the people you serve with wasn't a weakness to be overcome, it was a strength to be celebrated and cultivated. The young woman who'd been told she was too emotional to fly had become the colonel who taught an entire generation that emotion, properly channeled, was the secret to exceptional performance under pressure. And somewhere out there, a new generation of pilots was learning that the best warriors weren't the ones who felt nothing. They were the ones who felt everything, and used that emotional investment to find ways to bring everyone home safely. That, Janice knew, was a legacy worth fighting for. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.